So I decided to do some work on my transmission, 2000 Chevy Venture minivan, and it's been shifting hard, revving high, and then jolting into shifting. I looked up on YouTube and found that it was probably some electronic shift solenoids along with the pressure control sensor. Ordered those from Oregon Transmission, and lo and behold, when I got into it, I found out, I don't know if you can see, this is a remanufactured unit. Bought this car secondhand, so I really don't know what to expect going into it, but the videos that I saw suggested, obviously, take loose the ball joint, pulled out the CV joint. That was a little bit of a challenge. If you don't have the right tool for it, you can use either a crowbar to pop it loose, or what I did was I just made a choke chain with some chain that I had and a bolt and then a little slide hammer, and it popped right out. Next, you unbolt the engine cradle, and these front-wheel drive cars have a cradle that carries the entire engine and transmission. You unbolt that, unbolt the sway bar, which the bushings need to be replaced anyway, and then you have to be careful because the engine cradle carries your power steering rack, and you don't want to separate your power steering shaft or your steering shaft that comes out of the steering wheel. So what you do is you loosen the two bolts for the power steering rack, take one out, and your power steering rack, I don't know if you can see, your power steering rack actually rotates up. So you take out the bolt out of your power steering rack on the driver's side, loosen the one on the passenger side, and then when you drop the cradle, it just swivels up out of the way, and then it'll fall right back down where it needs to in its saddle. Well, I'm at the point now to take loose these bolts on the bottom. I was warned that they'd be really hard. I don't really know what to expect, how hard they're going to come out, but I'm thinking since this is a reman unit, they won't be too difficult to come out. They are a they're a Torx bit, and I'm going to pull this cover off here. So you can see you don't have to pull the transmission to get this cover off and do the solenoid repairs. If you just have a little bit of patience, you take these parts loose. I have the engine jacked up right now, but when it comes down, I'll be able to pull this off, and we can see the guts. That'll be the next video. Okay, I will say this. This is a T40 Torx bit. Compliments of Pittsburgh. I'm a DIY cheap guy, can't afford expensive tools. That's why I do my own work. But while that's draining, that was the one, that was the Torx bit needed to get those Torx fittings loose. I did a couple things up here that you might want to think about. Since you're lowering the engine cradle, and you will be lowering your engine, you want to take loose your intake tube so that you don't chance ripping that. That would have been attached right here, and you want to take all that loose with your mass airflow sensor. And then I also took the airbox out. The airbox was kind of in my way. It's not hard to take loose. There's two 10mm bolts on the top of it on this side. It hinges up, and then your ECM comes out. Just set that off to the side. Don't let it get wet. And it gives you a lot more room to work right here. I also pulled the harness for my ABS unit, and once that was out of the way, it was fairly easy to get to this other stuff, your ABS connector right here. Now I'll be cleaning that with electrical connector cleaner and using some dielectric grease on all these connectors when I put them back together. This right here is the connector for your transmission. You will want to disconnect that after you get all this done. And then one final thing that I did that kind of helped is the cable for your cruise control is right here. And you can kind of see, or that's actually your shift cable, forgive me. Your shift cable is right here, goes to your transmission, and it's got two 10mm bolts on this flange right here, this mounting bracket. and it kind of got in the way. So those 10mm bolts, or 13, I'm sorry, 13mm heads, you just take them loose. This thing will move out of the way, and then you can see all this wiring harness. You can move it without damaging it and without putting too much strain on it. You don't really want to put a strain on it. You risk damaging a wire or something like that. So if there's any other helpful stuff that I can think of, I'll let you know. Now I had to release the cradle all the way. One thing I forgot to mention is when you drop the cradle on one side, that's this thing right here, this subframe. It's called a cradle. It's 3/4 inch bolts. That's a 3/4 inch head. You take them out completely on the driver's side and you loosen them on the passenger side. And what that does, it allows it to drop over on this side but stay up on the passenger side. Now in order to get this case off, which I did, I couldn't hold it with both hands and hold the camera and try to do it. I had to put the engine in an intermediate position right here. I had to get up above and pull up on this AC line. It just flexes, it's not a big deal. I mean, you don't wrench on it real hard, but it'll move out of the way. You can see how it kind of moves back and forth. And then release the cradle so that it falls all the way down. And it's just slack right there. You can see how it's kind of, probably can't see it because the camera's shaking. Sorry about that. So I'm gonna let this drain, go get some lunch, and then you can see the parts are right there. Real easy to get to. That's the pressure control sensor. Here's your solenoids over here. I'll get those swapped out, and Lord willing, the thing will work. We'll put it all back together. All right, couple of things to FYI. This gasket here goes around. This is where your CV axle comes through. That's a reusable gasket if it's not torn. Be careful not to tear it. The entire rest of the case has a reusable metal gasket. Forgive the table, it got caught on fire. And you can reuse that. So just wipe it off, be careful, clean out the case. I used some brake clean, made sure I didn't get the brake clean on the rubber gasket. And then I ended up ordering a technical service manual from Oregon, probably overkill, but it has a sweet little diagram here. It has some information here, and you can order this from Oregon Transmission, General Motors, and it tells you it's the 4T65E automatic transmission group. Just inside, it'll give you all of the transmission models that it comes on, and so there it is. And you can get this from Oregon Transmission, and I'll put a link to this in the description. I ended up getting the pressure switch. I ended up getting the AB shift solenoid, and this is one of these goes for first and second, and then third and fourth, and that's right up in here. And then the other one goes for between 2 and 3, and that's over there. So I'm going to replace that one, I'm going to replace that one, I'm going to replace that one, and I'm going to replace that one, and then this right here. Now when you take this, I wanted to say this, when you take the harness off, if you've ever done any kind of work on older vehicles, these stupid plastic clips, they are so brittle. And so be real careful. I took 2 of them off with my fingers and I broke them. And what I'm going to do is, once I put them back on, you can see that one right there is broken. I'm going to stick it into the sensor and then use a plastic zip tie to hold it in. And I'll show you that when I get finished with it. You got to do those sometimes with fuel injectors and the different ones. I found a good way to do it is just to slip a screwdriver up underneath that and just gently push up on it while you're pulling out gently on the wires. And once it starts to ride over the little bump right there, then it'll come loose. Those aren't stuck on real tight. You just got to be real delicate. So I'm going to go ahead and replace those sensors. This right here is an interesting way that these go in. There's a plastic clip, and that's like a spring clip, and it pulls out, and then the solenoid pops out that way. And when you put your new solenoids in, use a little bit of transmission fluid to lubricate the seals around them so you don't tear a gasket, and we'll get those swapped out. Alright, I got the cover cleaned out and got that gasket cleaned off. The problem is this O-ring that goes on the inside and then mates to the face of the transmission around the CV axle, it's going to want to fall out. And so if you have some type of gasket adhesive you can use, I don't recommend RVT because these are reusable gaskets, but Permatex High Tack, and put it on there, let it set up for just a minute, because you're going to have to negotiate this thing in and the gasket might fall off. So it's probably better if it's stuck on there. Okay, something kind of odd. This transmission is in a 2000 Chevy Venture. It is a pre-2003. They had a transition in 2003, so from 97 to 2002 they had a certain design for the 4T65E. In 2003 they changed some internals, and this is a pre-2003 because it's got the larger pressure switch assembly, this manifold right here. But when GM rebuilt the transmission, this is a remanufactured transmission, for some reason they put the pressure control solenoid for 2003 and up, and it threw me for a loop. It does not match the one that I got from Oregon Transmission. This is the one that I got. This is the one for 97 to 2002, and so it's a different looking solenoid. Now it'll still fit in the hole, the clips will still fit in, and the plug still fits in, but for some reason whoever rebuilt the transmission, I don't know if the parameters on the pressure control solenoid are the same. I hope they are, because this matches the transmission and all the other parts. That one that was in there does not, and so from time to time you'll have a snag. I had to look them up and look at the different styles to be sure that I had a pre-2003 transmission, so you might want to be aware of that. Also, if you're swapping out the torque converter solenoid, it's this right here, the TCC solenoid, that you can access the pin through right here. There's a little clip, and you can access it through this little notch. If I cannot get to it, then I'm going to have to pull the oil pump, and I don't want to do that. When you pull the oil pump, take all the black screws out, leave the silver screw in, and those should be fairly simple to get out. I'll let you know if I can get it out without doing that. Alright, so I apologize for not videoing while I was doing it, but I was too stressed out. I'm not a transmission guy. I did have to pull the oil pump, and I pulled all of the bolts except for that bright silver one. The problem is that silver one holds this cover on, and the internals of the pump, it's a rotating vane assembly, and if you take it off, the internals rotate, and you can't get it lined back up with the spline on the shaft unless you take the cover off. And at least that's what I found. And that created a problem for me, because when I took the cover off, the spline started to fall out, and I got stressed out, so I didn't video for you. It is doable. I will say this. A pair of needle nose pliers on each one of the vanes, hold them in with your fingers, helps. And you might use petroleum jelly if you have to make them stick better. And then there's a retaining ring that slides in the middle of them, and then very easy goes, put the cover back on, silver bolt first so that the cover goes on, and then torque your other ones down. And if I can do it, you can do it. What you're seeing here is the parts that I replaced, and I apologize. During the video, I used different words just because I'm not a transmission tech. But these are the parts and the part numbers, and I got them from Oregon Performance transmission. You can look them up online. I ended up putting in a torque converter lockup solenoid. You can see the part number right there. I ended up putting in 2 of these shift solenoids. One is used for gears 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, and then the other one is used to shift between 2 and 3. They're identical. This is one, this is the other, and they're interchangeable. Then I changed out the electronic pressure control. They call it a motor solenoid, but it's also just a solenoid. And then I changed out the pressure switch assembly. And I'll show you this later. I purchased one of these books, and it did help. It gave me some ideas. Now, I may have gone overboard. You probably can bring up these pages online, and maybe you don't need them, but it did help me. Now, I'll say this too. I ended up taking off this oil pump assembly, and I had to do that to change out the torque converter solenoid, because you can't get to the retaining clip for that torque converter solenoid unless you take off the oil pump. Now, I learned afterwards, talking to a transmission guy, that you can go to your local transmission shop, or possibly from Oregon Transmission, get an assembly lube. Because when you take this oil pump off, there's a gear, a splined shaft, a splined pump assembly, and the gear drops down in the hole and you can't put it back on, so you actually have to disassemble the pump. You're looking at the pump right there. You have to disassemble the pump, and then there's all these vanes and things that want to fall out on you. So if you go that route and you end up replacing this right here, I would highly recommend you get their assembly lube. It's almost like a grease, and you take the cover off of the oil pump while it's lying flat on a clean surface. You put the assembly lube into the oil pump, and then when you reassemble it, all those parts stay like they should, and it allows you to line that shaft back up. It keeps things from falling out. And you can probably find that on Oregon Transmission's website, or at your local transmission shop if you go by there. Also, that assembly lube will help something else. When I disassembled this oil pump, all the fluid drained out of it. So when you start your car back up after the reassembly, it's going to chatter a little bit, and it's going to pull in some fluid. I shut it down immediately, I refilled it, and I ended up putting 5 quarts in. I ended up losing 5 quarts of transmission throughout this entire process. Originally I thought it was only 3, but I had to get 2 extra quarts, and it brought it up to normal. The chattering went away. I didn't leave it on very long, but those pointers may help you. So now on to the repair.